Hey, what's up guys? So Uniden is now officially launching the new Uniden R4, and so far I'm a pretty big fan of this detector. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Uniden R3, the R4, it's basically the R3 but on steroids. They've given it even longer range, better false alert filtering, plus a bunch of useful new features, including some features I've never seen before on any radar detector. And in this video, I want to go over all the new changes and improvements that are available here in the R4, especially compared to the R3. Now the R4, it's available for pre-order now. It retails for $449. Now, due to supply chain issues, there is going to be a very limited number of R4s available at launch, and so I expect it to sell out just like the R3 did at launch and just like the Redenso DS1 did at launch. And so if you want one, I'll have a link in the video description to where you can pick one up. Now, full disclosure, this is not a paid or sponsored review. Uniden sent me a copy of the R4 early so that I can test and review. The copy of the R4 that I have, it is a pilot production sample, so same hardware as what's available in retail, and I've been testing both beta and public firmware. If you want to purchase an R4, if you use the affiliate link down in the video description, I do make a percentage. It supports my channel and allows me to continue doing videos and tests like this here for you. And I've been driving with the R4 as my main detector for about the past 2 weeks or so, and so in this video I want to go over tons of information all about the R4, especially including all the improvements and changes compared to the R3. Now, I figure most everybody knows about the R3 at this point. This detector is kind of legendary at this point, and the R4 builds upon it and adds some really nice improvements. Now, taking a closer look at the two detectors, you'll notice they're very similar. The R4 has a refreshed design. It's a little bit more angular, and the buttons on top are a little bit larger too. And this new angular design, I've noticed, also carries over into the updated UI as well. However, it's what's under the hood that I find most impressive. You see, Uniden's added not just one, but two LNAs, or low noise amplifiers. And low noise amplifiers, they basically amplify or boost the signal strength and essentially give you better sensitivity and longer detection range. And I definitely find improved range compared to the R3. And in testing, so far I've been finding its performance to be extremely impressive. For example, doing some red barn testing, starting off with 33.8, I find it to be performing right at the top of the pack. On 34.7, again, it did excellent. And on 35.5, it also did really well here in my testing. Now, of course, results will always vary between different tests and different copies of the detector and whatnot, but so far I've been finding very good performance. Now, I've also done a second test, kind of picking up 34.7 around a bend, and in this test, again, the R4, it did excellent. And just to put the improvement into context, here's a quick side-by-side look of both the R3 and the R4 so you can see how much more range the R4 will add. So definitely impressive results here. And in practice, I've also had similarly impressive results. For example, here's a quick 35.5 detection that I found driving down the road. And what's most impressive about this encounter is it's actually going to be picking up an officer who's shooting at 90 degrees off axis relative to me. He's going to be up the road here on the left side of the road, and he's currently hidden behind some trees. And you can see him over on the left side of the road now at the red light. Now with other detectors, I usually get really short detection ranges when they're shooting 90 degrees off axis like this, but the R4 it did surprisingly well here. Now Hidden Cam has been doing some beta testing with his R4 as well, and he's been posting his test results over on the forum, and I'll link to his different testing down in the video description. And looking over his test results that he's been sharing, so far it looks like the R4 is a very strong performer. Sometimes it can be a pretty big difference, other times it's going to be closer to other detectors, but again it's going to trend towards the top of the pack. And looking at some of his other R4 testing, the results again are similar, where sometimes it's going to perform very similarly to other high-end detectors. And then in other situations, again, when conditions allow, you'll notice the R4 outperforming some of the other detectors, including many of Uniden's own non-LNA detectors. So when it comes to long distance range, it seems like the addition of the LNAs has made a really nice improvement here to the R4. Next, let's take a look at false alert filtering. So the first thing to talk about is the R4 now adds auto lockouts. So just like the R7, now when you pass by the same false alert several times with the R4, the detector will learn that false alert and it will automatically lock it out for you. Then when you come by again in the future, that signal will be grayed out and muted so it doesn't keep alerting you to the same false alerts every time. With the R3, you had to manually create all the lockouts. With the R4, it can now do it automatically. Plus, the R4 adds some additional memory, which you kind of need when you're learning all these different alerts, both real and false, which is also going to give you more memory. I know with the R3, people would actually run out of memory, even doing the manual lockouts. And with the R4, you're going to have more memory, which is good for both manual lockouts and necessary for auto lockouts. Next, the R4 adds a new sensitivity mode called Auto Mode that's going to allow the detector to bring down its sensitivity when you're driving around town to help cut back on false alerts, and then crank up the sensitivity when you're driving on the highway. And you can go into the detector and adjust the speed threshold to where it raises or lowers its sensitivity level. It's a lot like using advanced mode to customize the sensitivity of the detector, but now it can actually vary based on your speed and not just run full time. Additionally, we've also got more K-block options available to help deal with some of the blind spot falses. Now, in addition to the 24.199 K-block that we had with the R3, the R4 adds a second K-block for 24.168, and both of these options are going to help deal with some false alerts against your Hondas and your Acuras. And the new K-block, it just helps knock out some of the additional false alerts. Now, over on Uniden's website, they're saying that the R4 has the best K-band filter on the market, and it offers the least amount of false alerts from blind spot monitors and other vehicles. However, so far in my roughly 2-week experience of driving around with this detector, I definitely find that it falses more than some other detectors. Now, I do find that the R4 can filter out some GMCs, for example, and the K-block features, they do help knock out many of the BSM falses, but I still get some falses from different Hondas and Acuras even outside of the different K-block ranges. Additionally, I've also gotten falses from some Jeeps, from Buicks, and some Mazda CX-5s. Now, for the past month beforehand, I've been driving with the new Escort MaxCam 360C, which has similar BSM filtering to the Redline 360C, and I found that detector has been much quieter than the R4 is. And so while the R4 does add the new K-block feature and it helps kind of cut down some of the false alerts, I don't find that it's going to be the quietest detector on the market. I do find that some other detectors are going to be quieter than the R4. Next, talking about K-band stuff, the R4 can now scan wider on K-band, especially if you need kind of your lower end K-band scanning. I'm still trying to get word on exactly what the lower end K-band range is, maybe 23.9 or 23.950, but either way, the R4 can scan lower than the R3 did, which was kind of limited at 24.050. And this lower end K-band can definitely be useful for your photo radar detection. Now, the R4, it can detect MRCD and MRCT, just like the R3 did, plus the R4 now adds support for the GATSO RT3 and RT4. Now, in my early testing, I find that with the GATSO feature enabled, I get quite a few GATSO falses. I don't have any GATSO in my area, or multi-radar for that matter, so I've just been testing to test out the false alert filtering, and I do find the GATSO falses are pretty common. I get them even more than the multi-radar stuff. Now, once people start getting their detectors and we start getting some test results, we'll get a better sense of what the detection range is like against your different multi-radar and GATSO sources. I'm optimistic, I guess, considering the added range and sensitivity of the detector, but of course we'll have to see once people start actually posting their test results. Next, with the R4, there's now 2 different display mode options. I personally prefer alert display number 2 because it's more similar than what I'm used to with the R3, plus I like the fact that the text is a little bit bigger and easier to read. Additionally, the R4 now adds an ambient light sensor, so it can automatically adjust the detector's display brightness based on ambient light levels and not just being reliant on the time via GPS. Next, let's take a look at RDD immunity. Now, on Uniden's website, they advertise the R4 as being undetectable by the Spectre Elite. And I've done some testing in the past with the Spectre Elite and the Spectre 3 against a bunch of different R3s, and what I found in the past is that, yes, the R3, it's pretty much stealth against the Spectre Elite, but it is detectable by the Spectre 3. Now, I don't have a Spectre Elite on hand right now, but I did some testing with the R4 against my Spectre 3, and I found that just like the R3s, well, the R4, it's also detectable as well. Now, doing a bunch of passes, I did find that sometimes it was almost completely stealth, which was really cool, but in general, the R4 was definitely detectable by the Spectre 3. Additionally, I could also pick up the R4 with my Spectre when I pulled up behind the R4 vehicle, similar to an officer maybe pulling up behind you at a red light. And this was kind of surprising, I guess, considering the lack of a rear antenna on the R4. And honestly, I was expecting a little bit better with the addition of the LNAs. Usually LNAs help to kind of block signal leakage going back out of the detector, but it looks like with the R4, it's still detectable by the Spectre 3. I don't know how it fares against the Spectre Elite. I haven't tested it, and in the past, we've seen a little bit of sample variation between different copies of Uniden detectors, but so far, based on what I've seen with my R4 against my Spectre 3, if you really need a stealth detector, the R4 is not going to be the way to go. You're probably going to want to pick something else. Next, let's take a look at laser detection. Now, the R4 has a cool new feature to where it can not only alert to laser, but it can also now ID different laser guns. It'll either tell you the brand of the laser gun, or in certain instances, it'll actually tell you the model of the gun. Now, it doesn't ID every single gun in my testing, but so far I found that, yeah, it's able to ID a lot of them. This is pretty cool. Now, in my understanding, the sensitivity of the laser detection isn't changed compared to the R3, and, well, like any radar detector, laser detection isn't going to reliably protect you against laser, but the R4 now has some laser gun ID capabilities, which is pretty cool. I've never seen this in any detector before. I know some whistler detectors can actually tell you the pulse rate of the gun, but the R4 is basically taking the pulse rate information and converting that information into a laser gun ID. Next, I want to take a closer look at some of the physical design changes between the two detectors. Now, with the R3, the power cable used to be over here on the left side of the detector on the driver's side. Now with the R4, they moved it over here to the right side, or the passenger side, and I prefer it on the right side because if I have the detector hardwired up by my rearview mirror, you wind up getting a much cleaner install with a shorter run for the cable going directly into the detector. No more needing the cable to actually wrap over the top of the detector. Now, quick note, if you already have a hardwire for your R3, you're going to be able to reuse the exact same hardwire cable for your R4. All the power cable stuff, it's compatible, and the exact same thing with the mounts. It's going to be using the exact same mounts, same blend mount, all that stuff is compatible between the R3 and the R4. And speaking of things changing sides, like the power connector port, the headphone jack gets now on the right side of the detector as well, in case you need to plug in if, say, you're riding a motorcycle. The USB port has been changed. It used to be a mini USB port, and now it is a micro USB port, just like the Uniden R7. I wish that they switched to USB Type-C, especially if they're going to be changing ports anyways, but luckily they do include the appropriate cable that you need in the box, so you're going to be able to do the updates either way. And speaking of firmware updates, the R4 is compatible with Uniden's new update software, so with this new software, it's going to make it a lot easier to get your detector updated. Now, the software, it's also compatible with the R3, so technically it's not an improvement over the R3, but it is an improvement nonetheless, and so I wanted to go ahead and quickly mention it. Now, another change that I like, it's a little thing, is with the R4, you now have the ability to manually mute the detector when it's in the middle of a voice announcement. And that's just a small little software tweak with the R3 if you press the mute button when it's in the middle of talking and it's going to ignore your mute press. And so I just wanted to quickly mention that as another little but nice change. And so overall, between the two detectors, I mean, I definitely prefer the R4. That said, there are a couple advantages here with the R3 over the R4 that you may like as well. First off, it actually has to do with the buttons here on the front of the detector. Now, if you take a closer look here at the buttons on the face of the detector, you notice they actually stick out a little bit from the front of the detector, which is really nice. It makes it really easy to find the buttons and just press them in case you need to mute the detector or you want to change the detector's display brightness or manually lock out a signal, things like that. And if you compare that then to the R4, the buttons here on the face of the detector, they're actually basically flush with this front panel here. Plus there's a little bit of a lip here at the very bottom that kind of gets in the way when you go to press the button. Hopefully you can see it on screen. Maybe I'll turn it a little bit more. But it basically sticks out a little bit. So when you go to press the button, you kind of wind up hitting your finger against this bottom lip. It's not a huge deal. I mean, you can still press the mute button, but it is a little bit annoying to sort of hit this bottom lip here when you're going to mute the detector. And the same thing is true with the buttons on top of the detector too. You'll notice that with the R4, the buttons are a little bit bigger. The R3, they're a little bit smaller, but the buttons on the R3 are a little bit raised when you go to kind of get them just by feel, versus on the the R4, the buttons are basically flush with the top of the detector. Not a huge deal, but again, something you notice just kind of playing around with the two detectors. Second, the R3, it's a cheaper detector. It retails for $299, while the R4 retails for $449, so it's $150 more for the R4. And so the R3, it's still a great detector by all means, and so if you're looking to save some cash, the R3 could be the way to go. Now, according to Uniden, they have no plans on discontinuing the R3. They actually want to sell both side by side at kind of different price points. And so the R3 will wind up being kind of your less expensive option, and the R4 will be the more expensive one. Next, let's talk about some of the future plans and things that are going to be coming to the R4. In general, I don't like talking about future stuff, especially when there's no ETA for any of this kind of stuff. But there are a couple of new things here that you'll notice about the detector, so let's quickly point those out. Now, the first thing to talk about is a new port here on the side of the detector. So on one side, you've got your power port right here, but then if you look at the other side, you're going to see a similar looking port, but a little bit smaller, and this is not for power, but you're actually going to be able to plug in Uniden's upcoming laser jammers that are currently in development. And so whenever those laser jammers are available, you're going to be able to plug them in here to the side of the detector, and then you're going to have one kind of integrated package for both radar and laser. Escort has something similar, K40 offers this, and well, Uniden is now going to offer this capability as well. I have no idea how good the laser jammers are. I know the same company that makes K40's laser jammers, same company that's working on developing Uniden's ones, so we'll have to see how good they are in practice once it launches. Most people are probably going to stick to their ALPs, But if you want a fully integrated option, you're going to have the ability here. Second, if you take a closer look at the new cigarette lighter cable, you'll notice there's a new port here on the side of the power cable as well. This port is for Uniden's upcoming wired control pad. And this control pad is going to essentially duplicate all the features that you already can do here with the R4. So things like muting the detector, creating your lockouts, changing detector settings, things like that. And because it's essentially duplicating things that you can already do on the detector, it's not really necessary. But I guess the main advantage is if you mount it in a place where it's not easily accessible, you have, well, a secondary controller that you can now use to control the detector. If you have it hardwired by the rearview mirror, easy to reach. If you have it mounted farther away, I guess it could be useful for that. But if you're going to be running a wired control pad, you're probably going to be hardwiring too. So I don't know how useful it's going to be in practice, to be honest. I don't know when it's going to be available or its expected price point, but that's what that port is for. And so, yeah, Uniden is going to be working on a wired control pad. And then finally, well, there's also Bluetooth built in here to the R4 as well. Now, it's going to be disabled at launch, but Uniden is currently working on an app that's going to be able to interface with the R4. I don't know when it's going to come out. I don't know what features it offers. I've also asked several times, is it going to offer an open API? Still haven't heard back. I really, really hope so. But currently, yes, there's Bluetooth built in. No, we can't use it yet. And no, I don't even know what features it's going to offer. But it's something to kind of stay tuned for as the detector launches and Uniden is able to release an app. So we'll see more once that is available. And so, yeah, that's a quick look here. That's a look here at the R4. And personally, I think it's a great upgrade over the R3. The R3 was awesome when it first launched, kind of beat out everything else. And I think the R4 is also great as well. I mean, it's got pros and cons, just like everything else. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. Now, if you have an R3, should you upgrade? Here's the main advantages that you can take a look at. I found it gives you even longer range. You're going to be getting a little better false alert filtering. You're getting the new automatic GPS lockouts. You're getting the automatic speed-based sensitivity adjustments. You get an additional K-block for even more BSM filtering, plus you've got some additional photo radar detection. And for all these reasons, I think the R4, it's a really nice upgrade over the R3. But again, the R3, it's still a great detector, and I think the best detector that you'll find under $300. But if you want an even better version of the R3, well, now the R4 is available. And if you want one, you can pre-order one. I'll put a link right in the video description to where you can pick one up. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the detector, it's now available for pre-order, but I expect them to sell out really quickly due to part shortage issues, supply chain issues, and they only have a very limited number of them at launch. And so if you're watching this video and they're still available, you're able to pre-order one and you want one, go for it. It's a great detector, and I hope you enjoy it. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts on the R4, things I like and things I don't. Hope you guys are all doing well. I'll see you in the next video.